Welcome back to Gary's Economics. Today we are going to talk about why growth is stupid. Alright, this is a thing which I've been thinking about for a while, and it was prompted this week by an article which I read in the New Yorker, a good long article about British economics by a guy called Sam Knight, where he talks about basically the collapse of the British economy, the collapse of British politics. A lot of people are looking at us saying, what's going on in Britain? It's falling apart. And he interviewed a guy called Mark Carney, who is a former governor of the Bank of England. He was a governor of the Bank of England back when I was a trader. And Mark Carney had this very pithy way of describing the British economy and the British economic problem. And I've got the exact quote here. What he said was, it's just not that productive an economy anymore. This is Mark Carney, former head of the Bank of England. The problem with Britain is that it is just not that productive an economy. And we hear these kinds of arguments all the time on the news, from the Conservative Party, sometimes even from the Labour Party. The problem with Britain is we're just not productive enough. We as Britons have a fundamental problem. Our productivity is lacking. We're sort of fundamentally weak. We need to fix productivity. And I have a problem with this way of describing the economy. And first of all, I'm not against productivity. I'm not against economic growth. I think these things are all good things. If fundamentally the biggest problem was a lack of UK productivity, number one, what we'd be seeing is living standards falling, specifically in the UK. And I think a lot of people who live in the UK feel that what we have is a specific UK problem. It's very important to recognise living standards are falling for middle classes all across the world. All across the world. So this YouTube channel is watched all across the world. We've got a lot of viewers in America, in Australia, in places like Germany, the Netherlands. We get messages all the time saying living standards are collapsing here in the US, in Germany. It's definitely happening in places like Italy and Spain, even a country like Australia, which is generally considered to have strong living standards, a good place to live. Living standards are falling there. So if the problem was specifically UK productivity, and I'm not saying we don't have a problem with productivity, if that was the main problem, why are living standards collapsing all across the world? The second thing is to say, if the problem was a lack of growth in productivity, and I'm not saying we don't have a lack of growth in productivity, why are living standards falling? So in the last 5 years specifically, we have seen really a collapse in the living standards of the average British family. This has happened at the same time as enormous growth in inequality. We've reached a situation now when about half of the families in the country struggle to simultaneously feed their kids and turn the heating on in the winter. And this has not coincided with the collapse in British productivity. Yeah, we can argue there's stagnation in British productivity. But productivity is not collapsing, and yet living standards are collapsing. So again, we have a second disconnect here. But the third thing, and I think the most important disconnect is, if the fundamental problem in the British economy, or even the global economy, is a lack of productivity, why is wealth of the richest people in the country, the richest people in the world, millionaires and billionaires, why are these people's wealth exploding through the ceiling? So I'm sitting here now, we're filming this at the beginning of April. In the last couple of weeks, we have seen almost every single stock market in the entire world hit a new record all-time high. Does that sound like a world which has a problem of fundamental productivity growth? So we saw another piece of news that came out yesterday was that the world gained 141 new billionaires last year, in an amazing year for rich people. I always remember in the middle of the depths of the cost of living crisis, the Financial Times ran an article, and the headline was, "Will the boom in luxury goods ever stop?" That was the article. We saw in the first year of COVID, the largest and fastest ever increase in wealth of the richest people in the country. We saw the average US billionaire double their wealth in a single year. The average UK billionaire made £630 million in a single year. Does this sound to you like a country and a world where the fundamental problem is productivity growth? And I'll keep saying, I'm not against productivity growth. Productivity is great. If you live in a country and a world where living standards of ordinary people are collapsing, and living standards of the richest are exploding through the roof. Stock markets are exploding to new all-time highs. The gold price hit a massive new all-time high yesterday. Do you really think the problem is productivity growth? Do you not think there might be a deeper problem with inequality? So I think we need to look a little bit closer at who this guy Mark Carney is, right? So Mark Carney, as I've said, was former head of the Bank of England. He's actually a Canadian, he's not British. Before that he was head of the Bank of Canada, and before that he was a very well-paid banker for Goldman Sachs. So what you have here is a very wealthy man who has been very well paid throughout his career. I'm sure him and his family are all very rich. They are part of a class of very wealthy people who are getting richer very rapidly, whose living standards are increasing very rapidly, turning around to you and saying the problem is productivity. You guys are just not productive enough. And I think what we have here is one single example of a much broader problem, which is that economists and politicians, who very often are very rich, live in an economy which is seeing lifestyles of the very rich get fantastically better, seeing the wealth of the very rich explode very quickly, while your living standards collapse, turning around to you and saying that the problem is your productivity. And let's unwrap a little bit what productivity is, because I think productivity sounds like a very moralistic term. Productivity is basically GDP per worker, or sometimes it's GDP per hour worked. So essentially, unless people are working rapidly more hours, which in the UK they are, essentially it comes down to GDP growth. And these guys are basically saying the reason you're poor is because GDP growth is not high enough. And firstly, to say GDP is not falling. GDP of the UK now is higher than it was before COVID. GDP of almost every Western country is higher now than it was before COVID. GDP is enormously higher than it was 30, 40, 50 years ago when people like my dad, possibly your dad, were able to work regular jobs and buy houses. GDP goes up and up and up and up and up. The wealth of the richest goes up and up and up. Living standards for the rich go up and up and up. Ordinary people are really getting poorer very rapidly. And wealthy men, like Mark Carney, turn around and say it's because your productivity is not good enough. And we had a very similar example where Andrew Bailey, who is the current governor of the Bank of England, said that inflation is your fault for asking for higher wages. And Andrew Bailey is paid £500,000 a year. We have an increasing problem of economists trying to tell you that it's your fault. And in many cases, even saying it's not happening. There was a Conservative politician on TV just last week saying that living standards are better than they've ever been. It's very, very important that people like you understand inequality is growing. And inequality is growing very quickly. And when inequality grows quickly, living standards for the rich increase and living standards for the poor fall. Economists have a fundamental blind spot about inequality. What they are obsessed about is growth. And they will always be obsessed about growth. And they will always tell you that growth is the problem and lack of productivity is the problem. In my opinion, and I've got lots of videos where I hope I'll convince you, we have a fundamental problem of growing inequality. And what I see is a sick economy which has a growing cancer of inequality, going to the doctor and the doctor's saying, listen, don't worry about your cancer, grow your way out of it. Listen, we grow year after year and living standards fall. And it's not going to work. And growth is great, but I think it has become basically a mantra, basically a prayer of our intellectual classes, which is don't worry about anything else, just grow, just grow. And I think it's basically reached the point where growth has become essentially a code word from the very rich, which is, I'm an idiot, I don't understand this problem, I have no real solutions, but just fucking grow. With no plan. We're in this absolutely absurd situation in this country where we have a Conservative government whose plan is just grow, whilst absolutely starving people and government of the funds they need to provide any sort of growth. We have a Labour government that are going to come in and their plan is we're going to grow the economy without doing any investment and without putting any money in your pockets. I think growth has become such a meaningless word that it's just something economists and politicians scream about with no real plan. And I would like you to turn around to these economists and these politicians and ask them, with what money? What money do you want us to grow with? If we have no money to go out to our shops, to our high streets and to spend, then where is the economic growth going to come from? And if the problem is a lack of growth, then why do the wealth of the richest people in our country and the richest people of the world keep growing more and more? So, I would like to leave you with a message that growth in our modern age, as much as it would be wonderful, has become basically a signal of stupidity. People with no plans, people with no understanding of the problem of growing inequality are insisting that the problem is our lack of economic growth. We won't go anywhere good when all the money goes to the rich and nothing goes to anybody else. People like Mark Carney, people like Andrew Bailey, people like our very wealthy politicians, they're not going to do anything about it. It has to be you, it has to be me. We have to scream at these politicians and say the problem is not economic growth, the problem is growth of inequality of wealth. If you don't fix it, our living standards will collapse. So I'll keep making videos about it if you keep talking about it. It's not growth, it's not Mark Carney, it's inequality stupid. We have to fix it. Thank you.